Can India start dominating Test cricket at home once again?
This is going to be the first time that Shubman Gill, the Test captain, is going to captain the Indian team at home in India. And it will be interesting to see how India go about winning matches, and not just winning matches, but construct their way onto winning these matches, especially the way the pitches play out and the combination in which they play the team. And this is all the more interesting because of the last result we had against New Zealand at home, losing 3-0, and the constant debate about if India still can play spin. Now, before we talk about the change in pitches and if India are able to play spin or if the Indian batters have just gotten worse, hit that subscribe button. And here's our promo from our membership.
But nobody knew about a Rachel Hayhoe Flint, for example. So
people always talk about how the first World Cup's always been the 75 World Cup and the next World Cup 79 and whatever. But no one talks about how 2 years before was actually the first ever World Cup, and it happened to be the Women's World Cup in 73.
But yeah, this was the first few documented games of cricket. Married women versus single women. Just take a moment for that to sink in.
Reason we bowl overarm or round arm or whatever, we don't bowl underarm or chuck the ball or any of that, was because of just one woman. It's not even a team of women, or it's not even a game or a match. It was a cricketer's sister that started this. And then we see the women's game disappearing for more than 60 years.
And what he had to say, this is his assessment, that cricket was, quotes, not a game for women. Now, the common consensus is that over the years, batting in India has gotten a lot tougher. We've also seen this in the recent series where it feels like the Indian batters don't have a clue as to how to play spin. What we look at, however, is whether or not this is the toughest era for batters to play in India. For this, we looked at test matches happening in India from a period of 2010 up until 2025. Even in this, we'll divide the study into 3 parts. Starting off, we'll look at 2010 up until 2015 and how the test matches have progressed and how batters from both sides have been able to do in India. If you look at the overall figures in this period, there have been 22 test matches where batters have on averaged 35.7. The run rate has also been a pretty normal 3.1. However, if you further break this down into how the Indian batters have done versus how opposition batters have done in India, it paints a picture as to why India dominated this period. The Indian batters in this period have averaged 42, whereas opposition batters have only averaged 30. Not only that, the Indian batters have also been able to score at a run rate of 3.4 as compared to the 2.9 for opposition batters. And so it is no surprise that this was a period where India only had 3 test match losses as opposed to 15 wins.
And this is why we get into the next phase, which is from 2015 to 2020. This is yet another phase where India continued to dominate, because this is a period where we only lost 1 test match across 28 test matches. But something to note here is that there have been 30 test matches played in India in this time period, because Afghanistan played 2 test matches, one against West Indies and one against Ireland in India. What is interesting is the fact that the overall batting average has come down to 31.7, whereas the run rate per over has remained the same, and that is 3.1. And now if you see the averages between India and the opposition, the differences just grow wider. India's batting average in this time period was 45, and it is no coincidence batters like Virat Kohli, Rahane, and even Pujara for that matter, they were all in their prime scoring a lot of runs. In a time where Indian batters kept improving at home, the oppositions just kept getting worse, because their batting average in this time period was just 23. What is more impressive is the fact that not only did the Indian batters get better, but also the Indian bowlers did get better too. Because from a bowling average of 30 in the first phase, in this phase, the Indian bowlers only averaged 23, which continues to be better than the opposition, who averaged 42 with the ball.
And this is where we move to the current period, which is from 2021 up until 2025. Here we see huge differences in how the batters have progressed, and it just gets a lot worse. In a period of 22 matches, the overall average for batters is just 27. And even in an era where run scoring has become a lot quicker, run scoring in India has not necessarily gotten quicker, with a runs per over of just 3.3. And the biggest difference is how bad the Indian batters have become. Where in the middle phase they averaged 45, that number has come down drastically to just 32. While for the opposition, the change is still relatively small, with the average just dropping from 23 to 22. Just the fact that the Indian batters have gone so down in terms of their batting averages also coincides with how the form has dipped for many middle order batters like Virat Kohli, Rahane, as well as Cheteshwar Pujara. And that is also why it feels like in this era, test matches and test series have just been a lot closer. It has not been easy for India to be able to steamroll oppositions. Some of the most recent examples like the England series in 2024 or even more recently New Zealand go on to show that the gap between the oppositions and India is just decreasing. And something else to look at that drives home this point is the bowling averages, where for India there is only a marginal improvement going from 23 to 22. For the opposition, the bowling average has come down by 10 runs, going from 42 to 32. This shows a couple of things. Firstly, the Indian batters have definitely gotten a lot worse from the last phase, but the opposition bowlers have just gotten better against India. And so one thing that we can definitely establish is that this is the toughest era to bat in India. And so what needs to be seen is whether or not this is a product of the kind of surfaces that are being produced, or is it just poor batsmanship.
And this is where we break things down even further. Something to keep a note of is the numbers that you'll see from here on are from a Cricinfo article that we will link down in a description. With every breakdown, you start from a broader point of view, and that's looking at batting averages against pace and spin across the world. The phases are divided into two. One is from 2014 to 18, and second is from the WTC cycle era. A fascinating observation is that averages against pace have come down in every single country barring Sri Lanka post WTC era. But batting averages against spin is a whole other story, because India is the only subcontinent country wherein the average against spin has come down. It has gone from 32.1 to 27.6, and this has a knockout effect on the Indian batters as well, because interestingly the average of Indian batters against spin away from home has increased from 40, which was before the WTC era, to 45 in the WTC era, whereas the average of Indian batters against spin in India has come down from 45 to 39. Now, even though the average has come down post WTC era to 39, the Indian batters have significantly been better than the oppositions in India against spin, except for New Zealand, wherein we lost 3-0.
The New Zealand series was the first one that we lost in 12 years at home. Although it feels like an absolute anomaly, when you dig deeper into the numbers, it starts making a lot more sense. In this study, we looked at series starting all the way back in 2016 up until 2024 that have taken place in India. Something that's fascinating is that only on 3 occasions have the opposition batters been at least 0.75 times the average of an Indian batter in terms of playing spin. Now, while a couple of series were against Australia, the third such occasion was the New Zealand series. And in fact, this is the only series where an opposition's batter, that is in this case the New Zealand batters, have averaged more than the Indian batters versus spin. And so the next question that arises is, why have Indian batters just become worse against spin? Does it have something to do with the quality of surfaces or with certain attributes, or just the opposition bowlers getting better? Here is where we get into a little more specific details on how spin bowling has shaped up over the last couple of phases. Now, before we get into the nuance, we will establish a couple of definitions. The first thing is a low spinning surface. What this means is, when you look at the average spin of a ball on a particular surface, if that number is less than 3.6 degrees, that is classified as a low spinning surface. The second thing is a high spinning surface. As would be logical, the high spinning surfaces are ones where the ball on average turns 3.6 degrees or more than that. And now for a moment, if you don the batter's hat, something that might be tough for you to play against spin is that if the spin ball is pitched at a good length, and from there whether or not it spins more or less. Keeping these things in mind, there are two interesting data points. The first is a low turning delivery on a low spinning surface, and the second is a low turning delivery on a high spinning surface. When you look at these and compare it across the phases, you'll see that there's a huge difference in average. In fact, the difference for a low turning ball on a high spinning surface is more than 50 runs. Where in the previous era, the batter averaged 65 against such a delivery, that number has come down to 14.5 in the WTC era. And logically speaking, and something that then batting coach Vikram Rathore also spoke about, is how the batters are a lot more susceptible to straighter deliveries on high spinning surfaces. So basically, you can think of it as the batters who are starting to change their game a bit, because on high spinning surfaces they expect the ball to turn a lot more, and then they end up getting beaten by the balls that are straighter deliveries.
But there's a reason for why the Indian batters did average 65 in the previous era on conditions that were low turning but on high spinning surfaces. And this is why we get into why the batters have gotten much worse. And there are two reasons for this. One is the speed. Now imagine as a batter you're facing Jadeja, who not only bowls the ball quick, but the pitch assists the ball to turn even with that pace. It just becomes a lot more difficult for you to react to the ball because of the speed in which Jadeja is bowling and the fact that the ball is spinning away from you. And these are the kind of pitches you find in India post the WTC era too. It was first Aswin and Jadeja that exploited this surface, but then the opposition spinners started catching up too. Now this graph that you see is the evidence of that. If you see, the y-axis is the percentage of deliveries bowled at a certain pace, and the x-axis of course is the pace at which the bowlers are bowling. If you see the light blue line, you'll realize that spinners are ready to bowl much quicker at a higher percentage because the pitch allows the ball to turn even at such high pace.
Now, something to keep in mind is that after the delivery pitches, there is an alteration in the kind of speed at which it goes and also the kind of bounce that is found. In the WTC era, what has happened is that there is a lot more anomalous bounce. And what I mean by that is that the likeliness of a ball staying low or bouncing higher than expected is a lot more in this current era. Now, as a batter, you're comfortable playing against spin in a certain zone. As referred to in the study, we'll call this the Goldilocks zone for bounce. What happens is that if the ball tends to pitch in this zone, then the speed decrease is only about 30 to 50%, and this is still fairly okay for the batter to play. Whereas if the ball pitches outside this zone, there's a lot more anomaly in how the ball bounces, making it tougher to play against a spinner. What has happened in the current era as compared to the previous era is that this Goldilocks zone has just gotten smaller, and so it is tougher to play deliveries because of the kind of erratic bounce that can be generated. And so the current problem is that because of the kind of pitches being produced, the advantage that Indian spinners had over opposition spinners is slowly diminishing. In fact, it's very similar right now. An additional data point to be looked at is how high spinning deliveries, that are deliveries that are spinning more than 5 degrees, have been able to do for Indian spinners as well as opposition spinners. For Indian spinners, the number of high turning deliveries has gone from 9% in the previous era to 14% in the current era. Whereas for opposition spinners, that number has gone up from 7 to 14. So what you'll see is that while earlier there was a difference and Indian spinners were more likely to get the ball to turn more, that is no longer the case. Both the opposition spinner as well as an Indian spinner are turning the high turning deliveries by the same extent and percentage.
And so these are the reasons for why India was so dominant between 2016 and 19, because not only were pitches truer, but it's also the fact that the Indian spinners were far more superior than any other opposition spinner coming to India. And the Indian batters at that point and on that surface were a lot more better in technique to play the spinners too. Now this is also evident in the way the captains winning the toss went about choosing to bat first all the time. Because between 2015 and 20, out of 30 test matches played, captains won the toss and chose to bat first 27 times. Out of which they went on to win 15 on those occasions and only lost 9 of them. But post 2020 until 2025, out of 22 test matches, captains won the toss and chose to bat 20 times, yet they only won 10 of them and went on to lose 8 of those test matches. Which goes to say a couple of things. On pitches that were much truer and would deteriorate slowly, you would generally like to bat first because day one would be the best batting surface. And regardless of when India were batting, you already knew the likes of Aswin and Jadeja would be able to exploit the pitch. But post 2020, the story is quite different. Because of the kind of pitches India are going for, you already know that the surface is going to act up from day one itself, which is also why you don't see much of a difference while batting first or second.
And so from all of this, we're able to establish that this is in fact the toughest era to bat in test matches in India. Now, for Shubman Gill moving forward as the new captain of the Indian team and for the kind of template they're looking for, India is probably more likely and beneficiary to be able to play on truer surfaces. India has the kind of pedigree there is to be able to win matches on truer surfaces as opposed to these kind of obnoxious turners. If at all India continue to produce these kind of pitches, then they will have to ensure that their spinners are a lot better and their batters are able to handle the kind of spin bowling that the opposition might throw at them. This has been a video on this batting era and what spin is like to face in India. If you like this video, definitely hit like, share this video with your friends, subscribe to the channel more importantly, and for more geeky and in-depth analysis like this, definitely join our membership as well. There's going to be a lot of that happening on there. Follow all of our socials and we'll see you in the next one. Peace.